So, just some did you know information. As far as bespoke dishwashers go, they're getting even more energy efficient. Every single product that we put out there, we do try to ensure. Let me make sure I move myself. I don't want to be blocking any information here. Anything that we do put out there, we always try to ensure that it is Energy Star certified. Obviously, it's something that our customers are asking for. It's something that the government asks for, and it's something that we do as a company to show care not just for our customers but the environment, right? So these dishwashers are only using 3.2 gallons of water per cycle. The standard right now is about 4 gallons of water per cycle, so we're getting just below that benchmark line. This is going to take or utilize, excuse me, 239 kilowatt hours per year. So cost to the customer is about $31 a year if they're using this for average use. So normal average use is to run a cycle a day about. So if a customer is using this dishwasher once a day, that's going to essentially be the cost for them over the life of a year. Excuse me. One of the some of the other benefits are the storm wash. So storm wash isn't new to the bespoke model line, but the rotary arms themselves are unique to the bespoke. And I've got a video that I'll show you here in just a minute that outlines that better than I could explain it to you. But essentially, we've increased the angle or the coverage area that the spray arms are able to hit 1.5 times. And that's not just due to the storm wash. That actually is due to the nature of rotary arms that spin opposite directions from one another. And that's just at the bottom. We still have the same middle rotary arm and top rotary arm. The nice thing about the storm wash is it's beneficial to customers if they have, say, a heavily soiled pot or maybe more heavy duty items they could put over top of that section in the bottom rack. And that's going to just give it that little extra boost during the wash cycle to help get those things clean. We've increased drying 2.5 times. So if you think about when we first introduced the auto open or the auto release door, that increased drying by 35% from a conventional dishwasher. Introduce smart dry, and we'll talk about what exactly makes it a smart dry here a little bit later in the course. That improves it even further 2.5 times because we've actually introduced heat into this as well. So we'll talk about that more as we dive in. These things are whisper quiet. For both the drain pump and the circulation pump, we're using three-phase digital inverter pumps, uh, or what we refer to in our resources as U, V, and W pumps, similar to a stator on a motor on a washing machine. The nice thing about these is they are so quiet from a customer perspective that they won't know that the dishwasher is on. It makes it a little challenging for you as a technician to say when you want to check the drain pump before you could probably just press that start button or cancel button. First thing the dishwasher does is it turns that drain pump on and you can just listen for that hum. Put your hand on the dishwasher door and you feel it vibrating. That's a little bit more challenging when it comes to these three-phase digital pumps. You're going to want to remove the dishwasher from underneath the countertop if you want to be able to hear it because they really are whisper quiet. The circulation pump, a little bit louder, only because it's circulating water, and you're going to hear more of the water in the things inside of the dishwasher than you are the pump themselves. And then finally, if you're connecting this dishwasher to a network and you're utilizing our app, the SmartThings app, you can set it up to automatically reorder detergent as you need it. So you essentially set up how many pods, and this only works for the pods. We'll talk more about it later. You essentially set it up one time, and then you're going to get notifications on your phone when you're running low and when you're completely out based on the number of wash cycles you've ran. So again, we'll talk more about that. But without further ado, I told you I'd show you a video on those rotary arms and how they're unique. So let's go ahead and take a minute and watch that. I'm not a joyride, a hit and run. I'm moving on down the road. Watch me as I go, watch me as I go. Should I look both ways before you cross me, baby? All right, short, sweet, and to the point, but essentially, as I said, we've increased the range of coverage 1.5 times. There, and unless that customer is putting their dishes like right up against the walls of that dishwasher, it's almost impossible for it to not get hit with a spray jet. We'll talk a little bit later about the component underneath the sump that directs or distributes the direction of that water to the various spray arms. If a customer were to complain about a specific section of the dishwasher that's not cleaning, we'll talk about how you can troubleshoot that later on in the course through the distributor motor, the micro switch, and the main MyCom that interprets that information. So stay tuned for that. Another really cool feature about these dishwashers is the pre-blast cycle that's on there. This is for those customers that are adamant about rinsing their dishes at the sink. If you've been doing this long enough, you know at this point that that's not something that customers should have to do, and it's definitely not something that we recommend doing. Essentially, if they do that, they're wasting a ton of water at the sink, and they're defeating the purpose of the dishwasher. Your dishwasher is essentially just sanitizing your dishes at that point. So it's backbreaking. It's not good for the environment. It destroys the purpose of an energy efficient dishwasher in the first place. But if you talk to those customers and you're like, hey, you don't need to pre-wash your dishes. Actually, pre-rinsing your dishes can cause an over-sudsing effect because now the detergent is being too effective and it's working against itself, et cetera, et cetera. And that customer's like, nah, I don't know what you're talking about. I've been washing dishes for longer than you've been alive. I'm going to keep pre-rinsing my dishes. And you say, okay, well, all right, if that's what you want to do, I'm not going to stop you from doing it. But hey, let me tell you about this pre-blast feature that's on the dishwasher. Essentially, if you want to keep washing your dishes prior to sticking them in the dishwasher, how about I save you a little bit of time standing at the sink at least? And all you need to do is scrape them clean, stick them in your dishwasher, use this pre-blast feature. That's a feature where it's going to rinse your dishes prior to it even getting into the wash cycle, taking some of the legwork out of it for you. And now you can gain some better buy-in from those customers. So while this is a benefit for the customer, right? It's also a benefit for you as a customer education piece to get a customer to stop doing something that they maybe shouldn't be doing in the first place. And on the note of scraped clean dishes, you've probably been told this before. I know Mark does a great job on these Wednesday classes, but scraped clean means leave stuff on them, not food particles, not that heavy gunked on stuff, but like your yogurts, your oatmeal, your spaghetti sauce, grease, butter, that type of stuff, leave it on the dishes. I like to just take a paper towel and kind of give it a once into the trash can, get everything off of it, and just leave whatever that paper towel doesn't grab is usually what's okay to go into the dishwasher. Just don't use it as a garbage disposal, even though some of our dishwashers do have chopper blades in them. This one does not. Now, from a smart reorder standpoint, this is what I was talking about earlier. The Smart Things app works in conjunction with Amazon Alexa. So if they're also an Amazon customer and they're already pre-ordering things just through that, they can set it up to automatically reorder this stuff. It'll get shipped to their house through Amazon or however they get that stuff delivered. They basically say what the size of the packages that they purchase for pods. So let's say there's 30 pods in there. They'll just set that one time. And then what the Smart Things app is going to do is monitor how many times they run their dishwasher. Once they run it 30 times, they're going to get notifications that, hey, you're out of detergent and you should order more. They can set it so that they get a notification sooner as well. So if they say use 25 pods, they can then get that notification like, hey, you've got 5 washes left before you run out of detergent. Again, the nice benefit to the customer there is they might one day load all their dishes in there and now they're dirty and gross and it stinks and they reach under the sink and they're like, crap, I'm out of pods. And then they don't get the time to run to the store. So all those dirty dishes stay in there and then they finally go and get pods, but now their dishwasher has a bad odor to it. And that's when you show up, right? So if you ever experience that and a customer has one of these dishwashers and they're like, man, the odor in that dishwasher is terrible, and you see that they don't have this stuff set up, now we're talking customer empathy, right? Now we're talking about a better customer experience where you can educate them on this. Hey, are you using this feature? This is actually something that if you set it up, it's a set it and forget it type of ordeal. You can automatically reorder these things. You'll never have to worry about it again. And it's just adding that little bit of value to a customer experience that wasn't the best before you got there. Now, granted, it might be something they did even, but when we talk about empathy, it's putting ourselves in the customer's shoes and adding value as a technician to an appointment that the customer probably didn't want to have in the first place. And this is just one simple way to add that little bit of value and maybe turn a bad customer experience into a positive one. And they're like, man, even when this stuff goes awry, Samsung's got my back, or your respective, service personnel, your companies have their back, right? Now we're going to get into the nitty gritty of things here. Let's talk some technical stuff. I mentioned earlier that Bespoke now has a smart dry feature with the auto release. So that is the storm wash model only. With the storm wash model, we've kept the assembly on top that has the thermal actuator that pushes those pins out and opens the door, but we have removed all of the air ducts, and that little 12-volt fan that sits on top has now been moved down to the side. We've introduced a heating element, so we're now still opening up the door to release that steam, but we're circulating that air into an assembly on the side, past the heater, and then back out the front where the door is now open to help release that steam out. We'll talk about the specifics here in a minute, and I'll cover some other things that you need to know. But first, here's a little hype video on it. I'm moving on. All right. So there's a couple of little pieces of information at the bottom of that video as that was going through. It talked about a thermal sensor to help keep plastics safe. It talks about a couple of other things. So we'll dive into that here. Uh, Before I talk about the picture you see on your right, let's talk about the simple one that you see on the left. Something to be mindful of when a customer is maybe complaining about their dishes not drying properly on this unit. This air intake can be turned so that it is either open or closed. Now, I don't know why somebody would want to close it, knowing what this feature does, but it can be closed. So be aware of that. If a customer is complaining that there's water left over on their dishes or anything like that, just make sure that this is in the horizontal position, because if it's been turned to the vertical position, it closes that air vent. Then what happens is as soon as we suck that air in here, there's that little 12-volt fan that used to be up on top. And that 12-volt fan operates off of 1.7 kilo ohms of resistance. So if we're talking about, is that fan working? Is it not working? There's no air blowing out of this. That's what the customer's problem is. This operates like all 12-volt fans that we have in our machines. Your black and your red wires are your positive and your negative, and they're supplied between 6 and 12 volts. So generally, I'm seeing about 7 VDC on that. And then that little white wire is a feedback wire. So if we've supplied the voltage to it, you can actually check to see if it's spinning right at the board, because it should generate 2.5 volts feedback. So you can check 12 supplied, got it. All right, board's working. Am I getting 2.5 back? I am. Okay, fan is working. I'm not. Oh, the fan is stuck, right? Or maybe you got a bad harness. That's when you would need to go to the component itself. Either way, as soon as we get that warm, moist air into this assembly, it's then going to blow it past this heating element. This is a standard 120-volt heating element. And then in line with it are two TCOs. One TCO is processing your neutral, and one TCO is processing your L1. Okay, so if you ever have a heater that is not heating anymore, don't just say, oh, it's a bad heater, right? Check to see that you're getting 120 volts supplied, and then check for any open TCOs. Okay. It's also important to point out that this does normally have a cover over top of it. That cover is held in place by 8 screws. Just be careful, when you're taking it apart. There is this little red gasket down underneath it here. That is to prevent water from leaking out. So if this thing's ever leaking, check to make sure that this hasn't been compromised. And these do all have individual parts, part numbers, but at this time we are telling you to replace this as one assembly. So if anything on here goes bad, just go ahead and order the assembly to get it replaced. If you take this off, be mindful, just like on a case break on the opposite side of the dishwasher, it's got that little rubber gasket that sits between the cabinet and the part itself. When you take this off, just be careful that that doesn't hit the floor, roll off somewhere, and you forget about it, because if you don't put it back on, this will leak. And then the other thing that video talked about was it didn't use the term thermistor, right? But it said sensor, but this is what we were talking about. We're supplying this sensor right here with 5 volts, just like all of our thermistors. Temperature is going to change the resistance of it, communicating that voltage change, then back to the board. When that happens, the board knows what the temperature of the air coming through here is. So the benefit we were talking about there is protecting the plastics. Where you might have had in the past plasticware that said don't put, top rack only, don't put it on the bottom. That was because a lot of dishwashers use dry cycles that use really abrasive heating elements in the bottom of them that could melt plastics. We've set the board's logic to understand what those temperatures are and to not allow them to get above that point. So where a customer might have been worried about drying plastic in the dishwasher previously, they don't have to worry about that anymore because we've built it right into the board's thought process to not allow temperatures to get above the point that would melt plastic. This still exists. This is the auto release dry system. Now, as I said, it's changed slightly from what we were using on our linear wash models. The storm wash no longer has those air ducts or channels that are up there. It no longer has that 12-volt fan. They've been moved down to the side. This will still open the door up approximately 5 inches. If it opens up way more than that or doesn't open up to the 5-inch mark, check the level of the machine front to back. Left to right shouldn't affect the door opening too much unless it's pinching the door, at which point you'll want to check that. But either way, when we're checking level, let's check it 360 degrees and make sure that the unit is plumb. The way that this feature works is 10 minutes prior to the end of the cycle, that fan and heater start to turn on. Approximately 5 minutes before the cycle ends, that door opens up. The one that I have in my kitchen, I think every single time I've walked in there, it has opened up at the 7-minute mark. But take that as you will. Right about 5-minute mark, that door should open up. Again, there is no blower fan. It looks just like this. So when you take that top cover off, inside of it is just this little cam assembly, and then that's a little wax motor, or if you want to get technical, a thermal actuator. But the way that it works is we hit it with 120 volts, and when we hit that with 120 volts, the wax inside of there heats up and gets super hard. And then if you saw this video on the bottom left corner here, when that wax gets hard, it pushes that plunger out, putting pressure on that cam assembly. That cam assembly then pushes on those 2 pins. And when those 2 pins push out, guess what? The door opens up. It does take some time once we've removed that 120 volts for that wax to cool down. So customers cannot close their dishwasher door immediately once it opens up. If customers are complaining about this, though, let's say you go out there and that customer slammed that thing shut, they broke this, you need to replace it. And they're like, why does this stupid thing open? I hate it. My cats climb inside of there, or whatever they might complain about. This feature can be turned on and off. I'll give you the steps in just a second on how to do that. It's done through the options settings on the dishwasher. Now, for linear models, they operate the exact same way as the storm wash model does. The only difference here now is they do have the air ducts, the channels, and that 12-volt fan that sits right on top. That 12-volt fan works the same way that the dry fan works. The 12 volt supplied and the 2.5 feedback generated. That also is operating on a 1.7 kilo ohms of resistance. And as I mentioned earlier in the course, when we first introduced this feature, it increased drying by 35%. So now we've added on top of that the smart dry system that's increasing drying 2.5 times on top of that 35%. Customers complaining about dishes not drying due to it not operating as designed are quickly a thing of the past. Many times now, if a customer is complaining about it not drying, it's going to be due to it's not working as desired. And that's when you'll have to use all of this information around how it operates to dry in order to effectively educate customers on what they're doing or not doing that's preventing their dishes from drying properly. So make sure that before you have that conversation, you check all of these things that we're talking about. But our dishwashers do a fantastic job of drying dishes. So if that's what the customer's complaint is, we sometimes need to troubleshoot our customers a little bit further. Talking about what's on the other side of the dishwasher, we've begun to remove the case brakes. So that DW80R 9950 linear model does still have a case brake on it, and it works the same way that all of the other ones do. It's got a little flow meter inside of it, and that flow meter will provide a fill error if it doesn't pulse 660 times in 2 minutes. That is not the case on the DW80B7070 or the Stormwash model. We still have a standard air brake there, or vacuum brake as we're wording it on the slide here, and that's going to help prevent back siphoning or back pressure when we're trying to fill the dishwasher. It's also going to aid in the siphoning effect when we're draining the dishwasher, because at the bottom of it, you can see we still do have that drain hose attached at the base. Just like on the case brake, there is a little rubber seal that sits between those two. So if you ever have to service this, just like the Smart Dry system, make sure you don't lose that seal. But there's no flow meter on this dishwasher anymore. And we're checking it, the fill of the dishwasher, similar to the way that we've checked the drain of the dishwasher for many years. And it's the amp draw on the pumps. So the amp draw changes on the circulation motor based on how much water is in there and how much work it needs to do. So what you're going to find now is, instead of a standard fill and looking for 660 revolutions on a flow meter, we're simply looking for appropriate amp draw. So what you'll find is the dishwasher will fill a little bit, it sits, and then the circulation motor actually pulses for just a couple of seconds. And then it sits again as the board interprets the information from the amp draw, and that's when it knows that there's an appropriate amount of water to start the wash cycle. So what do you do with that information? If a customer has a 4C error on one of these storm wash dishwashers, we're not worrying about a flow meter anymore. You want to check to make sure that that circulation pump is drawing proper amperage now, and that proper amperage again can be found on the STG if you are servicing this stuff. Anytime you're doing any type of tests, whether you're on a linear model or a storm wash model, it's always a good idea to make sure that the detergent drawer is closed. That's because the detergent drawer is going to get tested during Smart Install or during OQC. And a real easy way to test it is to simply close it and see if it's open by the time the test is done. If you never close the thing, you won't know if it opened during the test. And this is an easy way to not have to break out a meter and check to see if we are charging the solenoid appropriately, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But looking down at these bullet points anyway, that solenoid, and I'll show you a picture of it in just a second, it doesn't need 120 volts for very long in order to do what we need it to do. We literally flash that thing with half a second worth of voltage, and your meter doesn't really pick it up unless you're working with a extremely expensive meter. Uh, so just make sure you're closing this thing, ensuring that it opens when you are testing it. The easiest way, though, to test this is right at the bottom of your screen. Use Haas. Excuse me. Close that, open up Haas, load control, detergent, open it. It should open up. If it opens up, it's doing exactly what it's supposed to, and you don't have any other tests you need to do. If it doesn't, that's when you'll need to start taking the door apart and testing that solenoid. Now, on all of these bespoke models, we are using a solenoid inside of the detergent dispenser or inside of the door. On some older models, just like the auto release door, we are using thermal actuators or wax motors. But either way, they both operate on 120 volts. They do both operate on a two-stage cam. So what I mean by that is, once we hit it with 120 volts the first time, that voltage opens up this door. When we hit it with when it resets back, it goes into a channel and it resets to the point that when we hit it with voltage during the rinse cycle, that's going to then trigger the rinse aid to go into the machine. And depending on what the setting is set to, we will hit it with a little bit longer or a little bit shorter, depending on whether the customer needs more or less rinse aid. That being said, there's only ever a couple of drops of rinse aid that are put in at any given time. So even if we do hit it with 120 volts for a little bit longer, it's not so much longer that you're going to be able to register it with your meter. So whether you are using a detergent cup like this one or a detergent cup like this one, make sure that it is closed. The one other thing to point out here is the non non-adjustable rinse aid dispenser. And it is a non-adjustable dispenser. You can still adjust, excuse me, the rinse aid setting, but it has to be done just like the auto door feature can be turned on and off in the options setting. You will also adjust the rinse aid setting in the options on the dishwasher, and I'll give you those steps here in just a minute. Right out of the factory, it is set to 4, whether it is a dial on the dispenser or a setting in the options. So this is what I was referring to. This is what our solenoids look like. We've got 120 going right to the back of them. The connections you see on the other side of the detergent dispenser are for the rinse aid setting. And that is what is responsible for throwing that little snowflake or sunshine blinking light on the top, or light doesn't blink on the top of the unit, just stays solid. So if that light is ever there, it's telling you that this sensor is registering the need for rinse aid. Doesn't mean that there's anything wrong, just customers got to put some rinse aid in there. And then if you do get 120 volts supplied to that solenoid, but it doesn't open the dispenser door, you can check that solenoid for 0.5 to 0.7 kilo ohms of resistance, or 500 to 700 ohms of resistance. If you have it and it's not opening, it's probably still bad, right? Just because something does have proper resistance, it could be stuck, whatever the case may be. If there's 120 volts at that solenoid, you'll need to replace this. If you don't have 120 volts at that solenoid, you'll need to check it at the board. But again, remember, it's going to be very difficult for you to actually check that 120 volts. So what do I recommend? Write what you see at the bottom of your screen. If you have Haas capabilities, check this with Haas. If it isn't Haas compatible, run a smart install, close that dispenser door, and see if it opens during that wash cycle. Okay. So I've talked a lot about now, you can turn this setting on, you can turn this setting off, and it's all done through the option settings on these bespoke dishwashers. So if you want to access these settings, what you have to do first and foremost is turn the unit on. Then you're going to press delay, start, and sanitize for about 3 seconds. And the first thing that's going to appear on the screen is U1 or U0, and that is for the sound on the machine. So that customer's like, I hate that little jingle that it plays at the end. You can turn that on and off. The auto release dry alert, then, so when you press then the sanitize button, it's going to cycle you through these steps, and then pressing delay start again is what toggles it on and off. So once you're past sound, you're going to see J1 or J0. Delay start will toggle it off. To move forward to rinse aid, you'll press sanitize. F1 to F6. Default out of the factory is F4. Just like on the rinse aid cup, it starts at 4. This will start at F4. Press delay start to cycle all the way through them to the setting that you want it to be on. And then auto release dry, and this is the actual door opening and closing, is A1 or A0. I'm going to point this out, right? This is the dry alert, J1 or J0, and this is the actual feature, A1 or A0. So this is going to turn the alert sound off, and this is going to turn the feature on and off. And if you're still sitting there scratching your head, don't worry, I'm a visual learner too. Here's a brief video to kind of outline that process. Okay, so really simple process, right? Just make sure you get into the options mode by pressing those 2 buttons. Sanitize will cycle through them, and then delay start is going to be what allows you to change them. To save it, just power the machine off, and it's going to save those changes for you. Okay. Now, earlier I mentioned that we would talk about what's responsible for distributing the water to the various arms. So we've got three positions that we can spray water to: the bottom rotary arm, the storm wash, and then the middle and top rotary arms. They are not independent of one another. They have to operate at the same time. And it's all due to this little guy you see on the left-hand side, or the distributor motor. So first and foremost, this is our circulation pump you see on the right-hand side. It is that three-phase digital inverter pump, and we are supplying that with voltage on the connector right about here. It does have that 120-volt heating element that's built right into it, and it does have TCOs built right in line with that heating element. That's standard 120 volt. So we're pulling water from the sump here and we're feeding it to the distributor through this line right there. Now the real magic of this happens when we remove this little channel here. If we remove this channel, what we see inside of it is a slotted channel, or cam, if you will. And there's three positions that that can be in. It's being driven by this little motor that you see on the back side there, which we refer to as a distributor motor. You'll also hear it referred to as an alternation motor or a half load motor. Either way, it's a 120-volt motor that turns that channel, and it is monitored by this little micro switch that you see right in front of it. And here's a much better visual representation of that right at the bottom. So this micro switch is the tattletale. It's the logic in this circuit that tells the board what position this cam is in. So if we're trying to send water to this middle bottom rotary arm, it's going to check to see what position this cam is in based on how long one of these slots makes contact with this switch. So this is a 5-volt switch that is going to open and close as these various little notches make contact with it. So let's say this is making contact with that. It shorts that switch for a second, and this one shorts that switch for 2 seconds. That's how the board's logic then knows, okay, this has turned that channel to this position. I'm sending water to the top spray arms right now, or I'm sending water to the storm wash or the bottom spray arms. Excuse me. And that's the way that those spray arms actually operate. So as it's in the one position, it's going to send water to those two. Then it changes position and sends water to the storm wash, and then it'll change positions again and send water to the middle and top spray arms. Again, those cannot be operated independently, the middle and the top. They're all going up that one channel. They're both fed off that channel. Once water's in here, we can't decipher if it goes to the middle or top spray arms. How can you check these things? Well, I'm glad you asked. I'd love to tell you. Right from the board, you can check to see that 120 volts is being supplied to that distributor motor. Easiest way to do it is to check it during in Haas. So connect Haas, go to load control, scroll all the way down to where it says alternation motor, and turn that bad boy on. You should then read 120 volts on your meter. So now you know the board is capable of sending voltage to it and turning that motor. But how do we know that it is actually turning the motor? Well, what's monitoring the motor? I'm glad you asked. It's that little micro switch. So that little micro switch that sits on that shaft is going to see how many times it gets shorted. Again, you can check to make sure that we're supplying 5 volts to it. And what's going to happen as that cam spins around, it's going to short that switch. So you're going to put your meters right on there, and you're going to see it go to 0. And as it spins, come back to 5, go to 0, come back to 5. So now you know that the micro switch is operating as it should. It's shorting and unshorting that switch, and the board should be receiving that information back. If it's not, one of two things is happening. The switch is stuck and it's not communicating back to the board properly, or it was never being supplied that 5 volts in the first place, right? But that's where you come in. You still have to be a technician in these regards, but knowing how these things operate are important. So if those checks don't check out at the board, or they do check out at the board, you got one or two ways to go. If they don't check out, you might have a board problem, but you want to, either way, you want to isolate the components then at that point, right? So if you get 120 volts at the board and that micro switch isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing, now we want to go to the component itself. So go to the component, check to make sure that that 120 volts is making its way all the way to the component. If it is and it's not spinning, check it for proper resistance. This one should be 2.6 kilo ohms of resistance. And then check the micro switch. Are we getting 5 volts to the micro switch? And then take those off. Put your meter on a continuity, beep, no beep. Stick them on the leads and just press it. Beep, 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 beep. Okay, the switch is working properly. Make sure that it can do it. It doesn't get stuck any of the times that you push it. Make sure that it's clicking. Make sure that the connections are seated on it properly. But something else that you all might be aware of, and you should be if you took our July monthly required training, is an issue with this yellow wire that you see on your screen here. This yellow wire is a shared neutral wire, and you can see it goes from the EMI filter all the way to that heater pump to the heater that's on that circulation pump, excuse me. So we're not getting hot water if we have an issue with this wire. Down here, the dispenser is associated with it. The water valve is associated with it. The distributor motor is associated with it. It's all a shared neutral wire. So if you get 120 volts at this board, but you don't get 120 volts at that distributor motor, you might have an issue with this neutral wire. We did release a service tip on this. Essentially what we found, and this isn't just specific to the model you see at the top of your screen, this is affecting various models, is it's pinching that neutral wire at the door hinge, and it's actually the sub harness that goes up inside of the door that you need to replace. If you haven't seen it, watch that July monthly required training if you can get access to it on SPSN. I'm not sure if it's still up there or not, but regardless, check this. Check your service tips, check your service bulletins. The customer is not going to see any error codes. You can check for them using Hash. You can check for them on Smart Install. You'll need to look them up. You could see a PC error, a 4C error, a 7C error, but the customer thinking about everything that's associated with that neutral wire, the heater, the dispenser, the distributor, that customer is going to have this thing is not cleaning my dishes properly. Or they're going to say there's no water in the machine. Or they're going to, right? That is normally going to be the complaint, is this is not cleaning my dishes, and any number of those things could be associated with it. So check to make sure that that machine's not being affected by this service tip. Check to make sure that you're not losing neutral along the way. Easy way to know if you're losing neutral along the way, tag a known neutral, right? So chassis ground right at the front where the wire connects in, tag that as a neutral, and then check for your 120 volts. If you got 120 when you're tagging a known neutral, but you don't on both sides of that component, you probably have a pinch neutral wire. You're losing neutral somewhere. You're not losing your L1 potential somewhere. All right, so make sure that you're checking those things. And then, of course, check to make sure that that distributor switch is operating properly. You will probably have if that's the problem, you'll have a PC error. More than likely, that PC error is a communication error, meaning that the board is not getting information back appropriately in that regard. So that was a whole bunch of technical information on the machine. If you do have any questions, again, please feel free to put them in the chat box. I do have some folks here, and I'm monitoring it as well, that can help answer those. But let's talk about some product knowledge type issues. Some stuff that the machine's working as designed, but not as desired type of issues. Cleaning complaints, drying complaints, and long run times. First and foremost, cleaning complaints. Gather more information. How is the customer using the machine? Are they selecting the appropriate cycle? Do they have a high loop? Is it draining properly? A poorly draining dishwasher will leave gunk left over and all types of nasty stuff, right? So check all those boxes. Check to make sure that the customer is not pre-rinsing their dishes. Again, scraped clean. Leave all that oatmeal, egg yolk, all of that yogurt, leave it. Dishes should be loaded so that soiled surfaces are open to the flow of water. So again, they shouldn't be overloading their machine. Here's the best thing you can do when a customer's complaining about cleaning tips or cleaning during your pre-call. Hey, would you mind loading your machine with a normal load of dishes prior to my arrival? You don't have to run it or anything. Just load it with a normal load of dishes and leave it at that. Use that phrasing, normal load of dishes. Don't try to guide the customer. Don't ask them that once you're on site. They're going to think they're taking the test and they're going to do exactly what you want them to do or what, right? So they're going to pull out the user's manual and they're going to be like, let me see, I'm supposed to load my dishes, like, right? Pre-call. Hey, would you mind loading your dishwasher with a normal load of dishes? So that's going to help you know if they are doing that, if they're blocking spray arms, if they're putting things up against the side, if they're preventing the detergent dispenser door from opening up. So ask that during your pre-call. And then are they selecting the correct cycle? Are they selecting sanitize if they need a higher level of heat during the wash cycle, or when the dry comes on? Do they have more plastics that we would benefit from boosting the temperature during the wash cycle? I'll tell you a little bit about the dry plus option later and how you can set that as a default thing for the customer. Are they coming out with a white chalky residue? This is normally due to customers either not using rinse aid or using a poor quality detergent or using too much dish soap at the sink. Most customers know not to put dish soap inside of their dishwasher, but I'll give you a perfect example. I went to a customer one time that was complaining about chalky leftover residue on their dishes, and when I got there, it was over sudsing. And I asked the customer, I said, "Hey, what type of detergent are you using?" They showed me. Everything was good about the detergent, but right up there on their sink was the biggest bottle of Dawn dish soap I had ever seen. And I said, "Any chance that's ever made its way into the dishwasher?" No, no, I know. I would never do that. About how often are you using this at your sink? Because she didn't have a high loop installed either. I said, about how often are you using this at your sink? Oh, I use it just about every day. I use it for like smaller items, stuff like that. When I don't want to worry about putting them in the dishwasher. I said, here's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to take care of this sudsing issue for you. I would I encourage you to use less of this at your sink. What was happening was she didn't have a high loop. She was using too much detergent, dish soap at the sink, and that was finding its way into the dishwasher, creating a film and a residue that was causing it to over suds inside. So a high loop is extremely important in that regard as well. Had she had that high loop, all of that dish soap that was getting into her drain wouldn't have a way to get into her dishwasher, but because she didn't have a high loop, all of that stuff was making its way into there. And as soon as it gets in there, it's not going to get out unless the customer cleans it. Little tip for you, and this is okay to do, just don't overdo it. Just a little bit of vegetable oil in the sump will help take care of an oversudsing issue for the customer. It counteracts it. It essentially gives that soap something to then work against, and it'll get it out sooner rather than later. So a little bit of vegetable oil, run a self clean on that unit, and it'll take care of any oversudsing that customer might be experiencing. Just make sure you're educating your customers, right? Being able to solve that issue for a customer is a whole lot easier to have a conversation on how they could have prevented it in the first place than for you to just say, well, you oversudsed your machine. Don't do that. And then leave. Don't, right? You can, but from a customer empathy standpoint, from a doing right by the customer, from a adding value to the appointment, if you can fix that issue for the customer, they're less likely to do it again and more likely to buy into your resolution on how they could have prevented it in the first place. Okay. What type of detergents should they be using? Detergents with surfactants, enzymes, builders, and bleach. Surfactants break down surface tension. They make the detergent more effective. Enzymes are actually what's doing the work. And enzymes are the reason that we want that food residue left over, the grease and whatnot. They work against that and make the soap more effective. Builders are things like water softeners that remove calcium, magnesium, hard water deposits, minerals, lime, all of that stuff. Builders are also the reason that a customer might want to turn their rinse aid setting down. We always talk about turning it up. We never talk about turning it down. Rinse aid settings should be turned down if customers have whole home water softener systems or reverse osmosis systems that are already doing what builders do or what rinse aid is designed to do. When we break down surface tension too much, again, that soap can then become too effective and can oversuds itself regardless of what the customer is or isn't doing. So be mindful of what type of whole home systems customers have in their homes prior to telling them to turn rinse aid settings up, because builders can actually become extremely effective in what they do to the point that they could create an issue for the customer. And then bleach is something that not all customers are going to be happy to hear is in detergents. Especially in 2022, right? Bleach can be corrosive, but the amount of bleach that is recommended is, again, put into pods in the amount that we would recommend putting it into the machine, which is why we recommend pods over everything else. Pods have predetermined amounts that are released at specific temperatures during the wash cycle so that they are as effective as they possibly can be. So the customer can't really overdo it when it comes to what they're putting in their machine. We really like pods. Detergents, when it comes to powder, they're okay, but customers store them in moisture-rich environments like under the sink, so they become hard, they become chalky, they become less effective. And then liquid detergents, low man on the totem pole. We really don't like them. We can't control how much customers are or aren't putting in there. They're also very water diluted. So they're a whole lot of water with a little bit of chemicals, and they're not super effective ways to clean the dishes. So if customers ask you, we recommend pods, then powder, then detergents. We will never hold a customer's face to the flame and say, you're going to use pods and you're going to like it, or you're not going to be a Samsung customer. Well, we're not going to do that, right? But we are going to professionally and politely educate our customers on what the best use and care of their machine is and can be. And then finally, we have Rinse Aid. Rinse Aid breaks down surface tension. It's like if you had a puddle in a parking lot on a hot day. If you just leave that puddle alone, it's going to evaporate, but it's going to take a little bit longer, and it might leave a stain. Now, if I were to take a broom and I were to push that puddle across the parking lot, I have now broke down the surface tension. I've spread it out. It's going to dry faster, and it's going to leave less of a mark where it was because it sat there for less of an amount of time. That's exactly what Rinse Aid is doing. It's a broom on a puddle in a parking lot on a hot day. If you look at that picture on the left-hand side, there's that little snowflake icon that tells the customer, hey, you should be using Rinse Aid. And if they're not using Rinse Aid and that little light is on, they're probably going to see on their dishes that picture you see right below it, high surface tension. It beads, it bubbles, it sits there. So what happens if I pick that plate up on the left-hand side, they're going to bead down, leaving a trail. They're going to sit at the edge of that plate and they're going to drip very slowly. Whereas that plate on the right hand side, I add a little drop of Rinse Aid to that. It breaks that surface tension down. It spreads that puddle out in the parking lot, which then allows me to pick that plate up, and all of that water is going to run off instead of bead off. And it's going to dry a whole lot faster. So Rinse Aid is something that's going to help with washing dishes. It's going to help with drying dishes as well. So when customers are like, I don't know, here's what you're going to do next. You're going to educate them on it, and they're going to be like, nah, I don't want to buy Rinse Aid. I don't want to do it. Well, I'll tell you what. Just so that you can see the difference, here's a free sample for you. You can now get free samples at the QR code that you see on screen. That's expertclean.com. You can get samples for cleaning products for the dishwasher and the washing machine. And when I say cleaning products, I mean like self clean for the machine. You can get detergents, you can get Rinse Aid, you can get dryer sheets, you get everything. Just know that if you do order these samples, I just ordered some about 2 weeks ago, and the message I got was, please allow for 5 weeks for your samples to be delivered. So the point here is order them sooner rather than later if you want to be able to not just educate customers, but provide them with a little bit something extra, again, adding value to that appointment. So one major reason customers experience drying issues is lack of or not enough Rinse Aid. Turn it up. If they have an older analog style one, I don't know, it's not analog, right? It's just a standard turn the dial. If they turn that thing all the way up to 6, it increases it. Turn it down to 1, it decreases it. But they'll have that little sight glass that lets them know when it is getting low. When it is getting low, they should fill it back up. We don't really have a specific brand that we recommend. It can be any Rinse Aid. It doesn't really matter. They all serve the same purpose. Now, for the digital ones or the bespoke model, the storm wash, this is again done in the option settings on the machine, which we just showed you a couple of slides ago. So you'll hold the sanitize and delay start buttons 3 seconds. Then you'll press that sanitize button until you see F4, and you'll press the delay start button to either turn it up or turn it down until it says F1 all the way through to F6, whatever your customer prefers or what you recommend based on their specific install environment.